I used to be an Uber driver. My most recent passenger asked me to drive him to hell. When I turned 16, I claimed my first car, a 2004 Hyundai Accent for my parents. They had bought it from some shady dealer downtown for $800. The vehicle was beat, having close to 230,000 miles. The paint was a faded yellow, with a replacement maroon rear door. Third gear was choppy, but a new transmission would cost more than the entire car. My family wasn't the richest on the block. Despite that, I was content with the vehicle. I would be able to go anywhere at heart's desire. At age 19, the Accent still ran, barely, and decided I could make a quick buck by working for Uber. Over the past few months, I've gotten used to driving people around downtown. I was the type of driver to not talk the entire way and respect whatever the person in the back was doing. All that mattered to me was that I was making decent money. With 2 jobs, pretty soon I could buy myself another car and ditch the old clunker. It was a Friday night. I had gotten used to driving around, waiting for calls. It was prime time for drunk people needing to get home. Eventually, I had gotten a call to pick someone up at an unmarked location. What was strange, however, was that when I was about a quarter mile from the location, I had recognized it to be the old Market train station, which had been abandoned since before I was born. I pulled up near the boarded-up entrance to the station and saw a tall, Hispanic man waiting. He looked very professional, wearing an expensive-looking suit and held a slim, black briefcase. I wondered why he was at the old station. The location didn't suit him, since it was the rundown part of town. He opened the door, and we greeted each other. He spoke in a strict, but rather kind and assuring voice. I took off and asked him where he would like to go. "Take me to hell, please," he spoke, which completely caught me off guard. I didn't really know how to respond, so I just peeped out a quick, huh. His face remained straight. "All seriousness, man. Where do you want to go?" I asked. "You'll know sooner or later." I assumed he was drunk, but his voice and tone were completely perfect. "I'll just take you McDonald's, buddy." He didn't reply. "I'll take that as a yes," I said awkwardly. We were almost at the restaurant. All I had to do was take a left. What the fuck? I instinctively turned the opposite direction. It was like someone was controlling my mind. I tried making a U-turn, but I just couldn't. The man in the back just kept quiet. What the fuck is happening? Is this some kind of joke? No answer. I knew deep inside that this was something supernatural. I tried to resist the feeling, but I couldn't get out of it. It was like I was in sleep paralysis. I made hundreds of turns, eventually not knowing where I was going. I didn't know where I was. By that time, the streets were completely empty. I took a right turn on an unmarked street. It was surrounded by trees. I couldn't see more than 100 yards in front of me. The road was completely straight, with a constant downward slope. I floored the vehicle, shifting through gears faster than I could imagine. I wanted to stop, but I couldn't. I looked at the speedometer. The Accent couldn't make it past 80 on the highway before, but the needle was topped out at 140. Soon, the needle made a full 360-degree rotation. I was going at least 200, and the engine was roaring louder than I could have ever imagined. I was so fixated at the speed of the vehicle that I didn't notice that the sky had turned red and was going downhill even further. It started getting immensely hot. My body had heated up to the point where I thought my face was on fire. I was going to hell. I looked back at the man in the back seat. His face remained still, looking at me with lifeless eyes. Suddenly, I slammed on the brakes. I was used to the shitty brakes of the Accent, thinking that we would slowly come to a stop, but I was jolted forward. The road was flat now, and we had come to a complete stop. "Thank you," said the man as he left the vehicle. I wasn't able to get a complete look at my surroundings, but I remember seeing the bodies. Piles upon piles of people, still alive, screaming in agony. I yelled out to the man, and he turned around. "Are you Satan?" He looked at me, and for the first time, smiled. Then I lost consciousness. I woke up, terrified that I died, and went to hell. I checked my surroundings. I was at the old train station. I soon realized that I could move freely. I quickly opened the door and got out. The sky was normal. It was a cold, summer night. No more screams. Had it been a dream? I looked back at my accent, horrified to notice what was in the back seat. It was the man's briefcase. Attached to it was a post-it note reading, "For a new car." I opened it, and inside the briefcase was $500,000. I tipped my Uber driver $20. I hope it was enough. Not sure where to post this, but here goes. Last night I was working late, so I took advantage of my company's guaranteed ride home program for overtime works and called an Uber. I was initially surprised when my driver pulled up in an unexpectedly nice vehicle, a Mercedes GL 450. I don't Uber that much, but when I do, I don't think I've ever gotten anything other than a Prius. This was next level. There was bottled water, chargers for every type of phone, and even some snacks. I actually checked my app to make sure I didn't request an Uber Select or something by accident. But it was just ordinary Uber X. I was thinking maybe I got lucky. The driver was an Asian girl. Chinese, maybe. I know there is a stereotype that Westerners can't tell the age of Asians, but I honestly couldn't say if this woman was in her early 20s or early 50s. She had that timeless, fresh Asian look, like that actress from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. She was very pretty, but there was something anomalous about her and Uber driving and this car. Normally, I don't make chit-chat with my Uber drivers, but it was a 45-minute ride home, and after half an hour in silence, the overall oddity of the situation eventually overcame my reluctance. "This is a really great car," I tried. The woman smiled. "Thanks, I like it too." I was racking my brain for follow-up, but everything that popped into my head sounded like I was some kind of stalker. There was another few minutes of silence before I tried again. "So, how do you decide to be an Uber driver?" "Oh, it's kind of a long story," she responded. "We have some time, I think." The woman looked at me in the rear view mirror. Her eyes were incredibly piercing, as if she was taking measure of my soul. Then she turned back to the road. "Actually, originally my husband was an Uber driver. He was a professional driver in China, which was a high-status job, working for government officials and high-profile foreign visitors. When we immigrated here, he got his commercial license and signed up with Uber. He drove Uber Black and only had commercial clients. Business was good, and he bought this car for that." "Oh, that's cool," I added. I wasn't sure where this was going, but when Uber got popular, there were more drivers. And then they introduced Uber X. Then anyone could drive. You didn't need a commercial license or anything. You didn't have to be a professional driver at all. For a while it was still okay, but over time there were fewer and fewer requests for the high-end Ubers. He thought he could make it up in tips, but at first Uber didn't have tipping. And even when they added it, most people still didn't tip. No one cared about the quality of service or the professionalism. On top of not tipping, people were so disrespectful. They would get the car dirty, come in with their dirty shoes or reeking of cigarette smoke. And worst of all, people would downrate him for no reason, just if they were having a bad day, or maybe they just didn't like Chinese. It was humiliating for him. His income kept going down, until eventually he couldn't even pay for a house. We had to move into an apartment, and even then it was a struggle. Eventually, he was so ashamed that he took his own life. I was stunned. I didn't know what to say. I was wishing I had just kept my mouth shut. Luckily, we were almost home. "That's really tragic. I'm so sorry for your loss." Since his passing, I've taken over for him, driving on his account. I go out of my to provide the best possible experience. And then, if a passenger still gives me a bad rating or no tip, I remember them. I know where they live or where they work. And later, I make them pay what they did to my husband. I was still processing the full import of this when the car came to a stop in front of my house. "Here you go. I hope you had a good trip." I thanked her and carefully exited the vehicle. As I entered my house, she drove away. My Uber app pinged in my pocket, asking me to rate my driver. My entire body went cold with fear. I gave her 5 stars and $20. I hope it was enough. I'm an Uber driver in Detroit, and I've got some stories to tell. I'm nearly out of college now, about a week away from my graduation. My degrees lasted me 4 years, and due to my father's death 2 years ago, I've paid for half out of my own pocket. Now, living in Detroit jobs are hard to come by. I was damn near dropping out to join the army just to be able to live before a buddy of mine recommended driving for Uber. I do it on weekends. You get an oddball every now and again, but it's decent cash, he said to me after a lecture one day. I already owned an electric car, an old 2009 Toyota Prius, so fuel wouldn't be a massive issue. Besides, I was and still am an extroverted person, so I love meeting new people. So, I started driving. I enjoyed it for the most part. What my buddy had said was not too far off the truth. But shit, I'd be lying if I said I'd recommended it, especially if you live in Detroit. There have been times where I've been so scared I've had to get new seats, let alone new pants. But since I'm about to end my short career working for Uber, I figured I'd compile all the memorable moments I've had into a piece of writing.
So, yeah.
Here you are, /
1.
I did a pickup once for a slightly older-looking dude from a nightclub. He got into the back seat with a significantly younger woman, who seemed either really drunk or really high. I couldn't quite tell, but I could smell liquor and weed, so really it could have been either, if not both. The guy, on the other hand, seemed pretty sober. Naturally, this sent of massive alarm clocks in my head, but I decided not to ask questions and just drive them to where they wanted to go. Neither of them said anything for a while, and because it was so late at night, I wasn't really feeling a conversation either, so I didn't say much either. I kept looking back at this dude for a while though. Something about him just wasn't right. He was older than most of my clients, around 40 to 45, with slicked back dark gray hair and brown eyes. No facial hair either, save a small tuft on his chin. The most notable part was his teeth. Whenever he smiled, which he was for most of the trip, I got a glimpse in the rearview mirror. They were crooked to the point of looking jumbled, like they were just dropped into his mouth at any odd angle. Most of all, though, they were sharp. Like, seriously sharp. They looked like they came out of some sort of carnivore, not a human. This really gave me the creeps. The worst part was yet to come. When we finally arrived at his destination, it wasn't a house. Well, it hadn't been a house for years. I'm sure you have all seen the photos of abandoned houses on abandoned streets in Detroit, and this house looked just like that. Nevertheless, I pulled up to the curve. "Are you sure this is the right address, sir?" I asked, while checking my phone to make sure I had gotten it right. No response. "Sir?" I ask again, still looking down. No response. Finally, I look up into the mirror to see nothing. No one was in the back seat, not the girl or the man. I checked, and the doors were still locked. I wouldn't normally, but when driving around certain areas, you need to lock the door. How the fuck would they have gotten out if the doors were still locked? Also, my hearing is in pretty good condition. I never even listened to loud music, so I would have heard them leave. Also, looking outside the windows, I didn't see anyone walking. It was a real job. I had been paid for the trip, so it's not like I had imagined the thing somehow. To this day, I have no idea.
2.
In Detroit, a lot of people go missing, adults and kids. It just so happens that I transported a man, and who I thought was his son, out into the middle of bumfuck nowhere, just for the dude to kill the kid, and burnt the body. At least, that's what the police told me after rounds upon rounds of questioning. You see, after I had finished that trip, I called it a day, and went to the local corner store on the way home to pick up some things, and lo and behold, who do I see on my milk carton other than that same fucking kid? I called the police, and it went from there. They never found the guy, but have linked him to 3 other missing children in the area. This one still messes with me.
3.
Here's one that more what the fuck than particular creepy. I picked up this guy once, from a small house a little ways out of downtown. He was tall, at least 6'4", and quite lanky too. I was in a good mood that day, so I tried to make a bit of conversation. I like talking with my passengers, as I said before. I enjoy meeting new people. Anyway, this guy says almost nothing. Like, one-word responses to every single question. Eventually, we get to his destination, another small house about 10 minutes drive from the pickup point. He gets out, says goodbye, and everything seems normal. I drive off, and must have made it to around 30 miles per hour when I hear a knock on the window. It's the same guy running. He motions to pull over, which I do. In a shock, I roll down the window to ask him what's up. "Sorry, I left my phone in the back seat." No context to the fact he just ran faster than anyone ever. Initially, I thought my speed dial was fucked, but I had it checked, and it was fine. 4. I always save the best, or in this case worst, depending on how you look at it, to last, so here's the one that keeps me up at night. I pick up this woman just outside of downtown around midnight. She hops in and starts to berate me, asking me why I took so long. Taken aback, I apologize. She immediately starts to break down and cry, sobbing, and just tells me to drive. The trip's a long one, half an hour to the airport. Along the way, she starts to talk several times before just going back to crying. Eventually, she spits T.I. out. He's coming after me.
That's all she said.
I asked her if she needed me to call the police, but she said they wouldn't do anything for her. He's gonna take me away with him, she blubbered out between quiet sobs. She went on to say other things, but they were inaudible mumbles. The last thing she said before I had to drop her off was, "The Nain Rouge, and he's getting close." Yeah, that was all the motivation it took for me to get her out and for me to speed off as fast as my shitty little Prius could go. The Nain Rouge, for those of you who don't know, is what I once believed to be anther bullshit fairy tale about a little demon that roams the streets of Detroit, causing all the bad things to happen for the city and dragging people back to wherever he came from. Not being a superstitious person, I never believed in it. Now I do.
Why?
Because when I checked the news later that day, the woman I had picked up was found dead. Not too strange, but definitely creepy that they found her body. The part that got me was the fact that police said she was dead for at least a month before they found her. I have a few more stories that I might tell tomorrow, but if you're from Detroit or if you just have any info on the Nain Rouge, I'd love to hear it, because the last sighting of it was back in 1976, but I know it's still around. Why I never Uber anymore. I hardly like to remember the first and last time I ever took an Uber, as it was a fairly traumatic experience. I had just finished an 11-hour shift, and I had hardly gotten much sleep the night before. Even if I had a vehicle at the time, I'm not sure I would have chosen to drive myself home because of my level of exhaustion. Usually I took a taxi home, but either the ones that drove past me that day didn't want to drive me, or they were all taken. So I chose to use Uber since my friends both raved so hard about it, practically preaching as if it were their personal religion. Well, in every few good experiences, there's a bad one, and this is where mine begins. Once my Uber arrived, I noticed it had no back license plate. But I didn't think much about it because, to be quite honest, I was a blink away from passing out onto the pavement, so of course I didn't think anything of it. The moment I sat in the vehicle, I noticed how irrevocably clean it was, especially compared to most of the taxis I had taken in my life. Another thing I noticed was how the man in the front seat never so much as took a glance in my direction. He even just sat there for a minute in complete and utter silence, unmoving. After that minute, I began to think that I had somehow gotten into the wrong vehicle and apologized. But once I did, the car started moving, so I relaxed a bit, assuming he may have just been waiting for a moment to get back into traffic. The last thing I remembered was watching the bustling downtown area going about its business, until my eyes finally chose to flutter shut and send me into a blissful sleep. I woke up once the car hit a large pothole in the road, causing me to whack my head into the window fairly hard. The first thing that alerted me to something being wrong was the fact that it was super dark out. When I had entered the Uber, it was at least 3 at night. It doesn't get dark at that time of year till at least 4 or 5 at night. On top of that, the highway, in which I didn't recognize, was practically dead, which that in itself was a rarity. So I couldn't even begin to comprehend how long I had actually been out for. As I glanced out of the window, I felt my heart sink into the pit of my stomach slightly. We were no longer inside the city. Instead, we were on a pitch-black highway surrounded by dense forest. And I didn't live anywhere outside of the city. I quickly began to feel the tingling sensation of eyes on me, causing me to turn my head to the empty seat beside me. Except it was no longer empty. It was nearly too dark to see, but I was able to make out the shape of a dark, lanky figure seated beside me. The only part of his face that was lit up by the dim dash lights were his insanely wide eyes, staring at me intensely. The way he looked at me gave me a sense of complete and utter panic. I was in a situation that I never thought could happen to me. It was something that happened to other people, never me. Do you happen to know if we're close to my destination? I questioned, trying to sound as calm as possible. The man beside me continued to stare at me longer than any sane person would be comfortable with. He has other plans for you. A new destination. We're almost there. The man beside me stated in an unsettling tone. At this point, I was sure the man hadn't blinked a single time since I had awoken. The man's words quickly sent my already present panic into overdrive. The car was going nearly 100 miles per hour on the highway in the middle of the night. My mind began to race as fast as the vehicle, grasping at any faint idea I could use to get me out of the car or out of my situation. If I jumped out of the vehicle and somehow didn't break any bones or end up dead, they would easily find me on the road. Plus, I had no clue where I even was. "I have to go to the bathroom. Could we maybe make a quick stop?" I said. The two men simply stayed quiet, practically ignoring my question, although it hardly seemed as though they had even heard me at all. "The others will welcome you once he is done. He will welcome you." The man in front seat finally spoke deeply, the vibrato and intent in his voice shaking me to the core. The moment a single vehicle finally drove past us, the light that filled the car was enough to help me see my surroundings better, giving me a moment to get a more clear look at the second passenger. The man beside me had fresh stitches all over his face. His top eyelids were stuck open, making his constant wide eyes more understandable, but no less unsettling. His entire face was almost like some sick sewing project, almost reminiscent of Frankenstein, but confined to the head rather than the entire body. "You came to us for a reason. He will be pleased to make you like me, like us," the man beside me said, beginning to stroke my hair and touch the features of my face. I began to shake under the stranger's touch as well as his words. His fingers were rough and disconcertingly dry. The sound of sirens from behind us let an overbearing rush of relief wash over me. But there was also an almost uncomfortable tension that fell upon the air. It felt as if something within the air was taut and ready to snap at any moment, as if the slightest provocation or wrong movement could cause it to blow. "Do you folks know why I pulled you over?" the police officer questioned once he reached the car. "No, sir, I don't believe I do," the man in the driver's seat said in a flat manner. "Well, for starters, you were going nearly 50 over the speed limit. That, of course, isn't a huge deal as it is the highway and it's not very busy at this time. But both of your headlights are burnt out, and that's too dangerous to be on the road. I'm surprised I even caught you. It was so dark," the officer stated calmly, tapping his fingers against the car as he stared into the dark vehicle. The moment his eyes made contact with my own, I tried as hard as possible to convey my fear, to silently plead for help without aggravating the two men in some way. "I thought I recognized you. There's a warrant out for your arrest. I'm afraid I'll have to take you in," the cop says sternly, singling me out. The men around me didn't seem to clue into the fact that he was talking to me, as I saw them both tense up at his words. The moment the police officer opened the passenger door beside me, I nearly began crying out of relief, but I refrained. The men behind me stayed uncomfortably quiet as the cop locked the cuffs on me. The now overly acquainted sense of unease and panic continued to fill me as I felt the men's eyes bore into my back. It felt like, at any moment, my chance at freedom would be taken away, that they would be armed and shoot my savior, or even me, but they did neither. Instead, they sat within the car quietly, just staring at us in a horrific trance-like state. Even as the cop car began to drive away, I somehow still felt their cold and unnerving stares upon my skin. The air still thick with tension, and no matter how far away we got, their car never moved so much as an inch, which made me feeling even more so stressed than before, if it was even possible. "How do you know I needed help?" "I'm a cop. I could recognize the look in your eyes from a mile away. I see it daily," he stated. Within seconds, I began breaking down in tears. Every emotion suddenly overwhelmed me. The man didn't say another word the entire ride. He simply let me cry it out. He even offered to watch my house for the night in case they came back, as I had given them my address. I, of course, said yes, even though I didn't sleep a wink that night. They never came back. They probably found another woman instead. The thought sickens and terrifies me. Maybe they never even left that spot on the highway. If that hellish car had never gotten pulled over, I don't even want to know what would have happened. I wouldn't have gotten my chance to escape the horrible situation I had found myself in. Be careful if you take an Uber or any other service like it. And no matter how tired you are, don't fall asleep in the vehicle.